I don't remember the first bomb that fell over my head. No one expects a baby to remember such things, but I grew up hearing the story so many times that it became my own memory, stitched together from my mother's voice, my father's quiet nods, and the neighbors who survived those nights beside us underground. Before I could even walk, I had already learned what fear sounded like. I was born in the autumn of 1940, in the middle of the Blitz. According to my mother, I arrived just before dawn after another sleepless night of air raid sirens. The midwife had been delayed because rubble blocked half the street. She finally reached our tiny terraced house with soot on her coat and dust in her hair, apologizing before she'd even taken off her gloves. Mom always laughed when she told me that part. "Trust you," she'd say. "You couldn't wait for peacetime." Our house stood in a crowded working-class neighborhood where washing lines stretched from window to window, and everyone knew everyone else's business. It wasn't grand, but it was home. The wallpaper had flowers faded almost white, the fireplace smoked if the wind changed direction, and every creaking floorboard had its own personality. My cot barely had time to settle before it became something temporary. Within days, I was spending more nights underground than in my own bedroom. The nearest underground station had become a strange little village after dark. Families carried blankets, kettles, parcels of food, and sleepy children down the long staircases. Every evening was the same careful ritual. Doors locked, curtains drawn, gas masks checked. Then down we went, hundreds of strangers who had become something closer to family, simply because we shared the same danger. Mother wrapped me so tightly that only the tip of my nose showed. She said she worried more about me catching cold than she did about the bombs. That probably sounds impossible now, but babies couldn't understand explosions. A winter illness, though, that was something she could see and hold. So she fussed over woolen blankets, knitted hats, and hot water bottles while the world above us burned. The station had its own smell. Coal dust, damp concrete, wet coats, strong tea, soap, and babies. There were always babies crying somewhere in the darkness. People tried to make the place feel ordinary. Someone played a mouth organ. Children whispered games to each other. Old men argued about football, as though Saturday matches still mattered. Women shared recipes using ingredients nobody had seen for months. If someone had managed to find a little extra sugar, word traveled faster than the sirens. Mom used to say that people became experts at pretending. Pretending the ceiling wasn't trembling. Pretending the distant rumble wasn't another street disappearing. Pretending tomorrow would look exactly like yesterday. Every so often everything would go quiet. Not peaceful. Just waiting. Then someone would hear aircraft overhead. Nobody spoke. Even babies seemed to sense the tension. The station held its breath together until the explosions began somewhere beyond the tunnel walls. Boom. Another. Then another. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Someone always squeezed someone else's hand. Mother told me I slept through more bombing raids than most adults ever managed. She wasn't sure whether that was a blessing or simply the exhaustion that comes with being a newborn. Food was another battle entirely. Ration books became almost as important as birth certificates. Every ounce of butter mattered. Every egg felt precious. Meat was measured carefully. And nothing, not a crust, not a dripping of fat, was wasted. Mother became astonishingly inventive. She stretched vegetables into soups that somehow fed 4 people. She baked cakes without ingredients most people would call essential. She traded knitting skills for extra carrots. She grew herbs in broken pots balanced on the windowsill. Looking back, I think her greatest talent wasn't cooking. It was hope. Every meal quietly declared that tomorrow was worth preparing for. My father worked long hours whenever work could be found. Some weeks he repaired bomb-damaged buildings. Other weeks he cleared bricks from streets where houses had stood only days earlier. He rarely spoke about what he saw. Instead, he'd come home, wash his hands slowly in cold water, lift me into his arms and smile as though nothing outside our front door could possibly be wrong. Only much later did I understand what that smile had cost him. One winter evening when I was only a few months old, the bombs fell closer than they ever had before. Our station shook so violently that dust poured down in gray clouds. The lights flickered, Someone screamed. Another mother instinctively threw herself over her little boy. My own mother pressed me against her chest so tightly she later worried she'd held me too firmly. The noise seemed endless. When dawn finally arrived and the all-clear sounded, people climbed the stairs carefully. The street looked unfamiliar. Windows had vanished. Roofs had folded in on themselves. Smoke drifted through the pale morning light. One house near ours simply wasn't there anymore. Where a family had eaten supper the previous evening, there was only broken brick, twisted iron, and silence. Mother never forgot that silence. She said it frightened her more than the bombing itself. For days afterwards, neighbors searched together, shared tools, made tea over makeshift fires, and found beds for families with nowhere left to sleep. Nobody asked whether someone deserved help. If you had 2 blankets, someone borrowed one. If you had 1 loaf, you cut another slice. If you still had a roof, another family squeezed in. There wasn't much privacy. But there was kindness. That winter was bitterly cold. Coal was scarce. Ice gathered inside bedroom windows. My cot was pushed close to the fireplace, though there wasn't always enough fuel to light it properly. Mother warmed my blankets beside the fire before wrapping me inside them, careful not to let sparks catch the wool. She often skipped meals herself, not because there wasn't food, because she wanted there to be enough for me. Parents have been making that bargain for generations. Mine were no different. As spring slowly returned, the daylight seemed to linger just a little longer. Flowers somehow appeared in gardens scarred by blast damage. Children kicked footballs around bomb craters as though they'd always belonged there. Laundry once again fluttered between.
Because it represented something much bigger. Someone had looked at broken wood and chosen to make a toy instead of kindling. Even then, people were choosing creation over destruction. I never truly remembered my first year. How could I? But I inherited its lessons all the same. Whenever life later became difficult, during hard winters, factory closures, family worries, or the endless changes that swept across Britain, I found myself thinking about those stories, about mothers carrying babies into underground stations, about fathers coming home covered in dust but determined to smile, about strangers sharing tea while bombs fell overhead, about children laughing in streets that adults barely recognized. The Britain I grew old in was nothing like the Britain that welcomed me into the world. The smoke disappeared, the ration books became museum pieces, the stations returned to carrying commuters instead of frightened families. Glass towers rose where bomb sites once stood. The accents changed, the streets changed, even the smell of the cities changed. Yet every time I hear an underground train rumble beneath London, I wonder how many people rushing to work realize that those tunnels once held entire communities, trying simply to see another sunrise. Perhaps every generation has its own storms, different fears, different uncertainties, different reasons to wonder what tomorrow will bring. But I hope we never lose what my parents' generation discovered underground, that ordinary people looking after one another through extraordinary times can endure far more than they ever believed possible. I may not remember the first bomb that fell over my head, but I remember the love that carried me through it. In the end, that's the story my family chose to pass on, and perhaps that's the memory worth keeping alive. If this story reminds you of someone in your own family or of the tales your parents or grandparents once shared, I'd love to hear them. After all, history isn't only found in books. Sometimes it lives quietly in the stories we almost forgot to tell.